Picture this. It's February 1959. Deep within the frozen, unforgiving wilderness of the Soviet Union, a group of highly experienced, elite hikers just vanishes without a trace. Weeks later, rescuers finally stumble upon their campsite, and what they discover absolutely shocks everyone to their core. It was a scene that completely defied all logic and basic survival instincts.
9. That is the stark, unyielding number we have to start with today. 9 incredibly strong, intelligent, and highly trained young adventurers went into those mountains, and 0 came back alive. So the central mystery here isn't just that they died, it's exactly how they died. We're talking about experienced survivalists who, in the middle of a deadly winter night, intentionally cut their way out of their only shelter and just ran, half-dressed, out into the freezing darkness. I mean, what could possibly drive them to do that? What really happened on Dyatlov Mountain? To understand the end, we kind of have to back up to the beginning. In late January 1959, an expedition led by a really skilled engineering student named Igor Dyatlov set out to cross the northern Ural Mountains. They were doing this to earn a prestigious certification reserved for elite hikers. Initially, 10 members started the journey, but before they even reached the deep mountains, one member, Yuri, suffered severe pain from an illness and had to make the incredibly disappointing call to turn back. Tragically, and honestly miraculously, that illness saved his life. He became the sole survivor of the expedition. The remaining 9 pushed forward, reaching the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, which literally translates from the local Mansi language as Dead Mountain, on February 1st. That evening, the group made a decision that basically set the stage for the disaster. Instead of descending into a nearby forest to get some shelter from the brutal winds, they set up their camp right on the exposed mountainside. Maybe visibility was poor, or, maybe they just wanted to save time the next morning. Photographs and journal entries from that night show everything was totally normal. They cooked, joked around, and settled in. There was absolutely 0 indication of the horror to come. The clues left behind completely contradict basic survival psychology. When search teams finally found the camp weeks later, it was just this terrifying puzzle. The tent wasn't ripped by the wind, it was cut open from the inside. And their belongings? Boots, heavy coats, food, literally everything you need to survive minus 30 degrees Celsius temperatures was just left behind. The footprints leading away toward the forest showed they were barefoot or just in socks, moving in extreme haste. Experienced hikers simply do not destroy their own shelter, unless staying inside is somehow far more dangerous than freezing to death. Section 1. The Frozen Crime Scene. The abandoned tent was really just the beginning. As investigators followed those frantic footprints nearly a mile away from the campsite, the case transformed from a rescue mission into a frozen, inexplicable mystery. Beneath a giant cedar tree, they made their first grim discovery. 2 of the young men frozen to death, poorly dressed and barefoot. Nearby were the remains of a desperate little fire. But here is the detail that sends shivers down your spine. The branches of that cedar tree were broken high up, some more than 5 meters above the ground. It strongly suggests that one or both of the men had frantically climbed the tree. Were they trying to get a better look at the tent? Or were they trying to hide from something on the ground? A short distance away, searchers found 3 more bodies, including the expedition leader Igor Dyatlov. Based on how they were frozen, they were posed in a way that suggested they were desperately crawling or moving back toward the tent. Whatever threat had driven them out seemed to have passed. Or maybe the freezing cold finally outweighed their terror, but they simply didn't make it back. So, what were they running from? The official cause of death for these first 5 hikers was hypothermia. Tragic, sure, but in those extreme temperatures, scientifically pretty straightforward. But the remaining 4 hikers were still missing. And when they were finally found as the snow melted months later, the entire investigation was turned completely upside down. There is a jarring split in the evidence here. The first 5 died of hypothermia on the surface, acting exactly like people freezing to death. But the final 4, found months later in a ravine nearly 250 feet from the cedar tree, had deaths that were not quiet or peaceful at all. They suffered massive internal trauma. We are talking crushed ribs and severe skull fractures.
Let's look a little closer at the bizarre evidence found on those final 4 bodies. The sheer force required to crush their ribs and skulls was compared by one investigator to a high-speed car crash. Yet there were almost no external wounds, no deep cuts, no signs of a brutal hand-to-hand fight, just tremendous internal pressure. Furthermore, one victim, Lyudmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue, lips, and soft tissue. Now, researchers do note that natural decomposition in a wet ravine can actually explain missing soft tissue, but at the time, it fueled rampant speculation. And the most baffling clue of all? Several items of their clothing contained unexplained traces of radiation. Why on earth would hikers in the wilderness have radioactive contamination on their clothes?
Just to muddy the waters even further, several witnesses in the area reported seeing glowing orange lights, or mysterious fireballs, moving in the sky above the mountains around the exact time the hikers perished. Some even described them as unknown aircraft. Faced with all this impossible, contradictory evidence, cut tents, crushing injuries, missing tongues, and radiation, the official Soviet investigation just abruptly closed the case. Their final, incredibly vague conclusion was simply that the hikers had died because of a compelling natural force. They offered absolutely no clear explanation, and many of the core documents were classified or just disappeared entirely. Section 2. What really happened? For over 60 years, experts, scientists, and amateur sleuths have tried to piece together this puzzle. In this explainer, let's examine the 3 most credible theories that attempt to explain the unexplainable on Dead Mountain. The most widely accepted scientific theory today, backed by modern computer simulations and snow dynamics, is the slab avalanche. Initially, investigators dismissed avalanches totally because the slope was too gentle, but researchers now believe a localized collapse of heavy snow could have occurred. Imagine being fast asleep and suddenly a massive heavy block of snow crashes onto your tent. The immense force could easily cause those severe internal injuries, spark immediate blind panic, and convince the group they had to cut their way out instantly before a larger collapse buried them alive. Now, this theory is really compelling because it beautifully explains the sudden, desperate escape and the crushing injuries of those final 4. But as a total explanation for the whole event, it kind of falls short. A localized snow collapse does absolutely nothing to explain the traces of radiation on the clothing, or the strange glowing lights reported in the sky, or why they wouldn't try to dig their survival gear out once the immediate threat had settled. That brings us to a much darker theory: secret military testing. You have to remember the context of the Cold War here. The Soviet Union was heavily involved in classified weapons development, missile testing, and secret experiments. The case for military testing actually ties together a lot of the weird loose ends. If the hikers inadvertently camped near a parachute mine or an experimental weapon test, well, it explains the glowing orange lights witnesses saw. A powerful aerial explosion could create a massive concussive shockwave, inflicting severe internal trauma without leaving external cuts. It perfectly accounts for the radiation traces, and the government's sudden rush to classify all the files. The massive problem here, though, is proof. Decades later, there is still no conclusive documentary evidence directly linking the hikers' location to a specific military test on that exact night. The third theory relies on a bizarre, totally invisible natural phenomenon known as infrasound. Under very specific harsh wind conditions, like those whipping over an exposed mountain ridge, the environment can produce low-frequency sound waves. Humans can't actually hear these frequencies, but our bodies definitely feel them. Scientific studies have shown that infrasound can trigger intense psychological discomfort, severe anxiety, and blind, overwhelming terror. Imagine lying in the dark and suddenly your brain is flooded with an inexplicable, agonizing sense of doom, causing the entire group to literally lose their minds and flee the tent into the fatal cold. Whether it was the crushing weight of a slab avalanche, the invisible shockwave of a secret Cold War weapon, or the silent, maddening vibration of the mountain wind itself, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains a chilling testament to the unpredictability of nature and the fragile limits of human survival. We have all these pieces of the puzzle, but they just refuse to fit perfectly together. Will the snow of Dead Mountain ever reveal the whole truth? Or are some mysteries destined to stay frozen in time forever?